going on, everyone? Here we are, back again for episode 2 of Deep Dive with me, Carter Hammond, and Jonah Wheeler. About to kill it. This is going to be a fun one, I think. Jonah, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Carter? I'm doing well.
I'm good. Did you enjoy your week?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. A lot going on.
Yeah, I feel you. I've just been I started new work this past month or so, and it's just been the hustle is crazy. But I managed to watch
I'm
that,
looking for a new job right now. We've had some things going on, but
hey man, the struggle is it's so real.
It is. It's very real.
Oh gosh, yeah, I definitely had a nice break and watched this movie. I think the title of it is I Am Divine, but it's about Divine, the transgender legend, and that's that was a nice mental break from everything about over the past week. It's a super highlight.
Yeah, I made the mistake of watching Capitalism: A Love Story, so I did not have as good of a break as you did. I was that's a very intense movie. I remember watching that 2016 and then rewatching it. I was like, ooh, this is
it's hard.
I don't want to be seeing this right now.
That's a hard one.
This is very sad.
yeah, that's a tough one. Jeez, I watched I did watch the first episode and a half of Immigration Nation, which just premiered on Netflix. That's horrible, man. That's a really horrible thing to watch.
Yeah, all those Netflix documentaries, I haven't even been able to watch them. Like the 13th or something like that. I can't watch.
13th is solid, but I mean, it's
I might have. It's on my list. It's hard for me to watch stuff like that, but it is definitely on my list.
Yeah, Ava DuVernay did a good job with that documentary. So I always that one. I definitely pumped to people. But I mean, Immigration Nation is just tough because it's literally just footage from the camps and the detention process and just private interviews with ICE, and it's just hard. It's hard to watch. But yeah,
I know you get that reminder that stuff like that is going on right now every once in a while, and it's really tough to
grapple
reality
with. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, for sure.
So at any rate, this week we're talking youth voter turnout, and I mean, for anybody that's watching this, part of what we're trying to do is also hone in on youth issues, in large part because Jonah is a solid representative of Gen Z, and I think it's worth getting that take on things. But I think what this is getting into why it's worth getting that take on things. So we have materials that we can go over, but Jonah, just let's just start with your broad take on it, and we'll jump from there.
Yeah, I guess my broad take on why youth voter turnout is so low is really because the education system promotes that. It doesn't want youth voting. It doesn't want youth participating in the process and engaging in politics and in their government, because the education system is there to create obedient workers for the capitalist class. And I think that is the general issue that we're going to be getting at today when talking about all these specific issues that play into youth not voting.
Mm-hmm.
And, in my personal experience, it's a lack of education, or a lack of critical thinking skills, and educating critical thinking, teaching critical thinking skills in these earlier ages before college, so people are engaged and want to be engaged in these very complex issues that bore them without that skill. And that is the big, it's presented in a very boring and I don't really know what the descriptor for it would be, but it's a very
really
boring
dry
way.
Yeah, it's
really dry. It's dry. And you get presented from this teacher, then you have to listen to this teacher drone on about whatever, and you don't get interested in it. And then as a result, you don't want to learn anything more about that because you're just trying to get the credit once you've gotten the credit, you move on and you don't think about it ever again, because
Yep.
that's the way it's set up in the system. You have to just keep going on to the credit and going on to the credit. And then after like a couple generations of this, you have such a misinformed populace that you get really crazy politicians like we have now. And like this is a big problem with not having an educated populace, is it's not just youth voter turnout. It's after a couple of generations, you'll have a totally misinformed populace that doesn't know what they're talking about on these complex issues. And then
Right.
uh like we get into a very dangerous area where it's easy to manipulate the populace and turn the country like that into a fascist state or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's more than just youth not voting. It's a whole different issue, or like a whole number of issues that start with like a totally broken education system,
Right.
or an education system that's working great for the people that designed it but broken for the people that are participating in it, for sure.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think like I so like I was obviously voter disenfranchisement plays a huge role in this, like especially youth voter disenfranchisement. But like I want to go like I think your point about critical thinking is pretty key. And like when I think about when I was like I remember when I was like the summer I was in 8th grade going into my freshman year, because like I went to Conval too. I remember older friends of mine telling me, like friends who were already at Conval, being like, because I had government and economics my first semester. Like, first thing I did when I got to high school was have government and economics. And, when I was there, it was like split into like half your semester was government, the other half was economics. And I remember someone telling me, oh, yeah, economics is a lot more fun than government. Like, and, and I mean, like now is like 2020 hindsight, I'm like, yeah, the reason that is because like we emphasize economics in our society but not civic engagement through government. So it was like, and when I think about my government class, right, it was really and nothing against my teacher, he was fine, but like the way it was presented was like, okay, here's what this branch is called, here's what it does. Like it was very I mean, again, to go back to that concept of dry, like it was really just like, all right, here's how it is, we're going to test you on it, get your definitions right, move on. What is a veto, what is a filibuster, like all that stuff. So it wasn't like there wasn't I don't remember there being an air of like, well, this is what determines our lives. You know what I mean? Like this is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and there was not a whole lot of like interrogation of those systems in class. Like it was very much so taught to, at least I felt like at the time it was taught to me like, this is how this is how this works, this is how you need to understand it, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah,
I can
it's compartmentalized, and that
right.
compartmentalization promotes not thinking critically about all these very like if you think about economics and government separately, then you're not thinking about how government plays into economics.
Right.
It's just you're not going to even consider that as a factor. And then you can get into like, oh well, I want the government to stay out of my life or something like that. You can get into those very
Right.
common sense kind of arguments that come from that compartmentalization that begins at a young age,
Right.
for
And
sure.
so, in a lot of ways, what this is like you're talking about a few different ways in which a system is trying to preserve its power, right? This, like, the system
Right.
being the pro capital crony government system, right? Like, that we've just sort of like has changed its form numerous times over decades, but it's always more or less the same thing. Um, that consolidation of power. And a lot of this is very, very like pedantic means to contain the knowledge of the populace and the active, like that social engagement, that political engagement of the populace. And it's not necessarily that particularly youth are disinterested, but that there's all these barriers that stand in the way of it. So, and actually, I think with on that point, I'll play some video really quick, just to sort of cue this up. This is John Holbein doing a presentation for the Batten Expert Chats on youth voter turnout and COVID-19. So this is pretty like, this was from April 29th. So this is a fairly recent video. But I think he kind of is getting at some stuff that's like, this is the big overlay. And he did co-author a book called Making Youth Voters Converting Civic Attitudes into Civic Action. So, and I obviously haven't had a chance to read the book yet, so that's part of the reason why I wanted to get this clip up. But we'll just play this and sort of like hear what he has to say about it and kind of bump it from there. Oh, wow. It's not queued up in the right place. Heyo, real-time production.
Voting cool, make it interesting, to get young people interested and engaged in politics. And while they've done a lot of good work, there's some reasons to think that this approach is actually a bit misguided. So if we look in survey data at young people's levels of political interest over time, as this figure is showing, young people's levels of political interest are high and rising, almost to the point where our current measures of political interest can't, are sort of like, we're capping them out, right? So in 2016, for example, a full 9 in 10 young people said that they intended to vote, right? One barometer of how oriented or how interested, how much they are sort of wanting to participate in politics. A full 8 in 10 said that they were interested in elections. This doesn't matter if you use different measures like, do you care who is the president, or do you follow elections, or various other measures of political interest. Young people are very, very interested in politics, and this has been especially true recently. The problem is that they're still not turning out. So it's not for a lack of political motivation. They have political motivation, they're just not showing up at the ballot box. So in the book, we talk about this gap between interests, sort of intention, and behavior, right? So for young people, the challenge is less that they're disinterested, and it's more that they really struggle to follow through given their interest that they have. They're about as twice as unlikely to follow through as older citizens. Okay, so why do young people struggle to follow through? So to sort of supplement the quantitative aspect of our book, we did interviews with young people around the country. We asked them questions, open-ended questions, why they did or did not turn out to vote. And sort of pulling out from those surveys or those qualitative interviews were a couple of lessons that we learned. So the first is that many young people lack confidence in their ability to engage in politics. And they feel like they need to know more about politics than they actually maybe need to know. This gap is not as big for older people. So older people are sort of willing to participate with lower levels of political knowledge than young people.
Okay, hold on a second. Can we like just have a chuckle about that? Like,
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't. That's
like, but it doesn't surprise me. That's the thing about it, is like, of course that's the case. Like, I don't know how many times. So this is okay for me when like, this is what I always think about, is like the amount of times that like it was impressed upon me that I would learn more later, or that I didn't know enough to make a decision at a certain point when I was like under the age of 19. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't personally experience like full blown, oh yeah, you go figure it out, until I left this town and went to college. And I mean, like, I was lucky enough to have like my parents in that space were very respectful of my opinion and stuff like that. But beyond my own, like the confines of my own house, it was difficult to get like any adult. I mean, even to this day, I'm like, dude, I'm 31. Like, even to this day, it's hard to get people to take, like, not call me a kid, or not, like, you know, to get them to take my assessment seriously, you know. And the amount of time that, I mean, like, look, I've spent so much effort trying to like get read up on things, make sure have all my ducks in a row before I try and talk about an issue. Sometimes I don't, and I have to eat that. But like, you really don't need to know much about politics in order to engage with it technically. Like, you need to know close to nothing. Trump voters prove that. like straight up.
Yeah,
So
you as a citizen, just because you're voting, don't need to know everything about healthcare policy or everything about education policy. You are voting based on what your principles are. And just because you're a young person doesn't mean that you don't have principles or beliefs that can be that like you can express in the outlet of voting for a candidate who you think aligns with those principles. But I
right.
mean that person in there was the poll, like the quote that they had was like I don't want to vote on party lines. I think that's idiotic. I think that is, yeah, right there. I think that is totally indicative of how people in my generation feel. I mean, you ask anybody, they're not talking about like, I mean, there are a couple of people, but they're not talking about like, I'm a Republican and I have to vote for a Republican. They are really focused on the policies of each candidate, however misguided they may be on whatever policy they support or whatever your opinion may be on that.
Mm-hmm.
They are focused on the policy of each candidate, and they do care about what that candidate supports. And
right. Well,
like,
and
it's
yeah. Issues based. Like that's the thing,
right.
is it's very, very issues based. Like anytime I talk to a young person, like they don't want to talk to me about, like, I say young person, like anytime I talk to somebody who's not my age or older, they're usually like, and even when they are my age or older, typically speaking, they don't think about it in terms of party. They think about it in terms of issue. I think it's like, it's once you start to get into more like politically active bubbles that people start to engage with it more on a party line. And I mean, even to a certain extent, like what we do here, right? We are existing in our own sort of like ideological bubble that we're doing our best to pop, you know what I mean? Like, but it still is. And I think like part of it is like, well, these discussions are meant to like give some attention to that bubble, because I feel like it just doesn't get anywhere near enough inspection, like to look at that ideology behind it. But when I really look at what education in school does, we want to talk about critical thinking. The issue is that it doesn't, in that classroom setting, you're not getting the connection between a government and ideology, right? That like civic engagement through voting, through showing up and
I think a
volunteering.
big part of that is you really only learn one ideology. You only learn capitalism.
Right.
If you are taught, I mean, that was one of the more surprising things about me when I took government and economics in my sophomore year of high school, was the socialism conversation. And I wasn't, and I am not a socialist in any like true sense of the word, or like not a Marxist, but it was shocking to me to see the only education you got on Marxism was a put down on Marxism. It was like propaganda against Marxism, and then why capitalism is great. And that was the economic education you got. Mm-hmm. And then if you question the teacher on any of those issues, you got shut down and said that wasn't true, and that this blah, blah, blah. And you're just kind of not that you're not encouraged to question and shut down, but at a certain point, they're like, that's enough questioning. That's okay. Yeah. You've asked, I do want to encourage questions, but that's too much questions. Right. I think you've criticized too much this system and this education. Just do the work so we can move on to the next topic. And that's the feeling I got, at least in a lot of these conversations. You try to like, well, why do we not learn about what did Marx say socialism was? What was his critique of capitalism? I'm interested.
Yeah.
And you don't learn that.
Well, and I think it's like, it's that moment that you're describing when it's like, okay, no more questions, right? Like that's that moment where that feeling of like, I don't know enough to participate in this discussion gets reaffirmed. And that's dismissing the youth. So when, when you're like, that is what, as is indicated in that clip, destroys the lack of confidence in youth when they go to vote, right? So they just feel like, well, I don't know enough about it, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to bother, like why? Like I need to learn more, you know what I mean? Tabled to when are you going to learn more if you're not doing that in college, or, like, are you reading books on your own? Like, do you and your friends have lively discussions about this all the time, or are you just going to check out and just let it go, which happens for most people? And that's something that's been a rhythm, right? Like since, through the 80s. So we are now sitting on top of multiple generations. Like my generation went through this, your generation has gone through it, Gen X went through it. So it's like it's that successive, slowly dumbing down the way in which critical thinking is involved in public school education. And it's like more about, okay, we're just going to give these kids these tools to get along and go out into our society and be able to engage with it. But we didn't necessarily frame it in a context of like, oh yeah, well, it's okay to question your society too, right? Like you can come in and you can ask a question about it and be unsure of something, and that doesn't
and it's
mean,
healthy to do so.
right? And it doesn't mean that you're less likely, you're less allowed to vote, or you're less worthy of participation. So like in that sense, I would say to, young people who feel disenfranchised by voters, in a sense, screw those older people. Like I screw what they're saying, because like,
Your opinions matter, and you have valid opinions. And in actuality, young people are the ones, like young people have a unique perspective that allows us like a unique criticism on the system that exists currently. And that's been the case with young people throughout history, because young people are the ones waking up in this system. They're born into it, and they see the problems with the system that the older generation has created, that they are entrenched in, that they think works because they created it. Like, no, you don't know because you didn't create it. We created this system. It must stay this way. And that is so like it's that dynamic is so clear right now because of the extremes that we're in this moment. You have like 80-year-olds running the Congress and running like who creates the education system and stuff, and then young people screaming for change on the streets, creating social unrest and then organizing in unprecedented manners to try and enforce this change. And that push and pull between the two is creating such like I don't know. It seems like there's, I don't know.
Well, I think
what are you gonna say?
I think, well, no, I mean, I think your point is right. I think the thing about it is that it's like those protests, right? They show us like in real time and space just how engaged politically young people are, right? The fact that those protests are overwhelmingly people under the age of 30, you know what I mean? It is an incredibly diverse group of people, racially, gender-wise. It's like across the board. This is it is an age thing in a lot of ways. Obviously the protests themselves are focused around Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, and that's the first and foremost, but there's no denying, and this is something that, great Black activists like Keeanga Yamada Taylor or Cornel West will point to and say, look, like this coalition extends well beyond the confines of just one particular ethnic group. That this is now an economic debate. And so that shows the engagement level. And then you see something like this, which is ridiculous, because like here we've got the blue line represents 18 to 29-year-olds. Red is 30 to 44. Green is 45 to 59. Purple is 60 plus. The down dips obviously are off presidential years. So voter turnout is gonna bounce every time anyways, because that's just, we have a problem with that in our society generally. So there's definitely the bigger conversation to be had about like how do you get over like 30% voter turnout or something to that, like it's like we're already talking about dismal numbers here, like this isn't great. And so the question then becomes sort of like, okay, how do you close that gap, right? And to understand that the systemic confusion of voter disenfranchisement, particularly youth voter disenfranchisement, that mechanism of saying, well, you'll learn more later, leading to I don't know enough yet, right? Like there's causal connections in the mind of somebody, especially when you're young and you're more impressionable, like you're bound to be more affected by something like that. And that gives
especially because you
look
up to these people too. Like
Right.
if your teacher is putting you down in that way, like in a certain sense, you idolize your teacher, no matter how much you like hate their class or whatever. You do still idolize that teacher. And when a person in a position of power like that, your educator, who's supposed to be giving you like an education on these issues, is like, you don't know enough yet. Stop talking about this issue. Don't question. That will really affect you in the long term.
Yeah.
And then it leads to something like this.
Right, exactly. And it's not just teachers too. I mean, it's like it's something
No,
for
no, no, no.
parents
Yeah.
to
It's,
consider too. It's like,
yeah.
if it like
It's like society as a whole. Yeah.
right.
And it's not even the fault of any individual teacher either. It's like it totally makes sense that they're going to say something like this because they were told the same thing as a kid too.
Exactly.
So it's just what you've been told. It's not like, and then you get people to fault the personality of an individual teacher as opposed to like the general system itself, and then nothing changes because people get defensive on it, which goes back to cancel culture, I guess. But,
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's funny. It's all going to connect, right? But no, I mean, I think these are all really like good points. So I say we continue along with that video because I think there's more in it that's got some value. But I did, like just the whole like not knowing and feeling like you shouldn't vote because you don't know enough thing just kills me, right? Like that the amount of knowledge isn't necessarily a whole lot different between the generation gaps, but like the bold confidence of older generations, like I don't know anything, but I know what's right. Like,
you know what? My opinion matters. Yes, it does.
The hubris. It's so good. So
yeah, like Barack Obama was saying that he was like, everyone thinks that they can coach the president when you're president. And it's like, yeah, that's so true. Everyone thinks that they can advise the president. Yeah, everyone thinks that they can advise a position of power because that they're an adult. I am an adult. I finally know enough. And now you do a war with Iran because I like oil, basically.
TFW, you're a Democrat, but you have a problem with democracy.
Exactly.
Like, gosh. Can't make this shit up, man. Okay, so
I'm a fascist Democrat. It works.
So good. All right. Let's see where this goes. Okay.
All right, and so there's a quote there. I won't spend the time to read it all, but we heard this again and again, that young people lack confidence in their ability to participate in politics. The second thing that we heard from young people again and again was that they found the registration and voting process intimidating and confusing. They were worried that they would make errors on voter registration forms, and many young people do make errors on voter registration forms. There was a recent study that suggested about half of young people, as many as half of young people, make a mistake on voter registration forms, such as not signing their voter registration form, not putting in their social security number, making the types of mistakes that will kick a voter registration form back to the citizen. So they make many, many errors, and they find the whole process confusing about when, where, and how they can register and vote.
Okay, like also, question, why, like absolutely why are we not teaching kids how to fill out a voter registration form?
That was the first thing
class?
I thought of when he was like, people don't know how to fill out registration form and they don't do it right. That is number one thing that you should be teaching kids in like a civics or a government engagement class, how to vote.
I don't
Basic
like,
101.
Wow, man. I just like it again, and it's so funny to me because he's kind of like, he's bringing up the whole rock the vote thing at like before this, and it's, it's like, clips of Diddy and Paris Hilton and all these friggin' people like, trying to get out the message or whatever, and they're just like, well, there's evidence to suggest that this isn't as as effective as it could be, and it's like, well, yeah, because at no point is anybody asking the youth what they want as a means to get where they're trying to go, right? Like, feel free to, like, I'm actually kind of curious about your specific take on this, right? Because I had this thought, this this past week because I was doing like I've been trying to figure out ways to like provide more mental health services for teens through the new job that I'm doing, right? Or just access like just a different place to go, something else to do. And I was told about like brochures that teenagers have been handing out to each other that will have resources on them, or little like Live Strong bracelets that, you know, say like you matter or something like that on it, and have a resource so a teen can take it, put it on their wrist. Maybe they don't necessarily need it at that moment, but if their friend is going through something, they can just hand it to a friend. You don't even have to say anything. You just hand it off, and it's kind of like the action is the message. You know what I mean? It's just like an acknowledgement, like, hey, I see you. I recognize that you're going through something, and that's hard. And I was told like, oh, we've noticed that these get taken a lot more. These get utilized a lot more. And I was trying to think. I was like, why is that? Like, why is that a more effective than just having like a cards out on your desk about like the local like crisis hotline? And the thing I came back on was like, well, it's probably because it gives those young people the opportunity to control the narrative, right? Like it's not like I'm some 31-year-old guy who's telling this teenager how, like, you know, like, oh, like, let me make sure that you have some resources to get help. It's like, so being in that experience with somebody who's going through the same exact shit as you, who's then saying like, hey, this is hard as hell for me, and I see what you're going through, and I'm here for you. Solidarity, right? Like it's like it's like it would, like, if it would mean more to me, you know what I mean? Like, it, like, even at my age right now, it means more to me when somebody who's my age says something to me than someone who's 30 years my senior, because it's a little
Yeah.
bit more validating in that contemporary experience. And I don't know if that's something that like, if like, do you feel like that's something that's worth trying to like pursue as a way, like as a framing for trying to engage with teenagers more, as someone who's currently in that demographic?
100%. I think that if, instead of like adults in the school board being like, if we get this celebrity to come here and motivate these people, then vaping's going to stop. If we get like recycled percussion to come bang some, you know, boxes and drums or whatever, then we're going to get them to stop vaping. No. You have to get like kids in the conversation, because like you said, they're going to relate to the experience, the lived experience of someone who's, you know, living the same experience that they are. If someone who's 60 years old and is on the school board is trying to determine what mental health services these kids need, that is totally based off of their experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not at all indicative of what the experience of the kids that are in school right now are having. And
Right.
this is a big thing that you see in schools. Like, they come up with these new programs all the time. They're just shelling out new programs, new posters, new whatever, new opportunities for anything you need or whatever. And while those are, they seem good, like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually helping. And everyone
Right.
in school feels that, and everyone in school feels it's not actually helping, and then nothing changes at all. But
Right.
if we had like someone who knew what they were talking about and who just happened to be in combat also, or just get the kids together and hear what their ideas are, even if
Mm-hmm.
they don't know specifically what they want,
Right.
ask them. Just be like, what do you think would be most helpful for you in getting the support that you need?
Right.
And we might have like a much better system that way,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just leaving it to the old people and the adults. I totally agree. Like, you're,
Yeah.
if you relate to someone who's who's living the same experience as you even more.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with old people not wanting to listen to a young person, or not wanting to vote for a young person. They don't relate to their experience. They don't want a younger person telling them as an old person what to do. They're like, we have to have old people be in office because that's who they relate to. It's the same thing on all these different, like, all different levels.
Yeah, we
People
put this
relate to,
premium on like accumulated experience, as if
yeah,
like, as if present moment experience has no bearing on anything. You know, it's like
yeah,
like it's this weird complete subjective thing. Like, No, it's that is like that. I would challenge people to think about it in terms of like the experience of a youth is the accumulated experience of humanity up until that moment. Like there's a certain amount of like that youth will experience accumulated societal ideations and framings because they are fresh to the latest iteration of the societal spectacle, right? Like, and it's
Which
like
I think makes their opinions almost the most valid, almost the
right,
most valid,
right,
because they are the ones who we can look at and say, is this society working right now? Look at our
mm-hmm.
youth. Are they're the ones being directly impacted? Like you can judge a society. There's a quote like you can judge a society based on its youth and some other things, something like that. I
Yeah, how they
sort of
take care
forget
of
the
their
quote.
kids and their elderly, I think, is the way it is,
Yes,
right? Like,
yes,
yeah,
that's it. That's it. And that's 100% true because those are the people. It's just if you look at the youth and they aren't doing well, that's probably indicative of the society that you have created, and it's not the fault of the youth. It's not the fault of them being on their phones or
right,
them not paying attention enough in class. And the solution isn't give them more ADHD pills or pump them with more curriculum, give them more tests, standardize everything. That is not the solution. And all of this is coming from a lack of youth voices at the table when coming up with these solutions.
right.
And not to say that any of these solutions are in bad faith, or I don't think they are. I think that they're just misguided solutions.
Right. Well, and I
Yeah.
think, back to the point of like, the reason you want to have those people at the table, right, is that to what you said, they're the freshest set of eyes. Like straight up. Anybody will tell you that it's always good to bring in a fresh set of eyes to look at a problem, because after a while when you've been looking at a problem for too long, it's like saying a word over and over again. You just kind of like it doesn't even have its meaning anymore, and it's just this weird shape and sound that is amorphous and totally like existent separately from everything else. And I think the other thing that I would say about that is that kids, young folks, right? Like teenagers, even small children, like without the ability to vote or really have any kind of like meaningful grasp of societal politics. Like obviously I don't expect a 6-year-old to like lay us out, although that has happened. But the point is that like the reason that has happened, even though, is because children are closer to the moral center of a society at any given moment, like the concept of like a pure moral state, right? Because most of the time, I mean I'm even wary to say that, but like quite often what we teach our children is like you got to love each other, you got to be friends. We teach our kids the golden rule, like so on and so forth. So when you're young, you have this very like totalitarian view of good and bad, and like what's nice and what's mean, and what makes somebody a bully and what doesn't, right? And so there's all these like immediate reads on stuff that is basically a product of lack of understanding of nuance, right? There's always this like, well, you got to understand the nuance behind the problem. And like the thing about it is like, okay, but sometimes all of that nuance is exactly what obfuscates from the fact that this is inherently wrong in the first place. And sometimes when a kid looks at that and they make that categorical statement about something, there's like how many adults that are like, yeah, that kid brings up a really good point. Like, it's ridiculous. So,
Yeah.
it's like, it's like, okay, you're willing, like adults are willing to use and tokenize youth as a messaging point. Like we care about our kids, and it's like, okay, well, if you care about your kids, why are you the one talking and not your kid talking right now?
Yeah.
Like
Why aren't you listening to your kid?
right?
If you care about your kid, you can't just say you care about your kid. Listen to your kid. What does your kid want? What does your kid say?
Right. And
at any
remember
level.
that,
Yeah.
like, we're all humans. Like, even it doesn't matter
Yeah.
if you're a tiny human, you're still a human, and we need to treat each other with humanity, and that includes young people,
Right.
right? And like, and especially, look, if you're gonna send, like, to get back to that, like when we talk about young people here, we're talking about pre-voting age right now in a lot of ways. The problem exists with 18 to 29-year-olds, right? Like, these are people who are old enough to become alcoholics. They're old enough to go die in a war. Like, I'm sorry. Like old enough to go to federal prison. Like, really, that's not like that's somebody that you do not alienate because they are now a part of the adult pantheon of Americans. Like,
Right. They're
you
now
made it.
fully participating in society.
Right.
Fully participating in the society. And if you're shutting them down, then that's creating a very dangerous like bubble where you're gonna like eventually it'll burst. You'll have a bunch of these people who
Right.
are super disaffected, super and have been shut down for so long, and they're just so sick of it that they have to revolt, or maybe that's not the best word, but they have to in some way
Push
uprise
back.
from
Yeah.
pushback.
Really.
Yeah,
and
pushback.
and in a way that the older generation finds really distasteful, right? Like,
Yeah,
because because it seems like such umbrage, or like throwing back in the face of their parents all of the love and effort that was put into helping them get to where they're at, which is just nonsense. It's not you can be grateful for it, but say it was not enough at the same time. And it's not
yeah,
necessarily that that's anybody's fault. That's just how it was. And so, like, on the flip side of that, what I would say is, if you are someone who is like on the older side of Gen X up, like, if you've got if you have children who are in their 20s, like you had kids and they've grown up now, stop calling them your kids. Call them my son, my daughter. Like, like, change your language a little bit, to like change the way that you talk to people in that bracket, to alienate them less. You know what I mean? Like, make them feel more like they have reached adulthood. Like, it's I mean, again, like, I've been reconnecting with like a whole slew of people that I went to high school with. Like, over 10 years later, we're all sort of like linking back up. And it's weird because so many of us are like, I can't believe that we're where we're at. Like, I feel like it was last year that I graduated high school, and now I have kids, and like, I don't know what that, like, they're big, they talk, they yell at me, like, I don't know what to, like, and like, I'm just saying, like, we were so never prepared to be adults. Like, we've always been infantilized by these older generations. And when you look at that in a voting context, right, that is why it's been so difficult to mobilize millennials and Gen Z, is because we've been consistently contained in this, like, your kids box. Like, we're always relegated to the societal kids table. And it's just getting old. And so, for older folks who want to say, well, how do we get out the youth vote? Like, what do we do? Straight up listen to them. Listen. Like, give them a seat at the table, right?
treat them like you would treat a member of your generation. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
like if they're an adult, if they're voting age, treat that person as if you're a generation. Give them a seat at the table and like equal time to voice their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And don't shut them down when they voice their opinion, and then you'll get actual mobilization from you, because they'll be like, oh damn, people are going to listen to us, we can
Right.
get engaged, I'm going to run for office now, I'm going to do this, do that, whatever, I'm going to become a leader in my community and help, because I have a voice that matters.
Right. And like, I like, for my own part, it's like, as the not, as the less young person on this stream right now, like, I would generally say it's like from me as a millennial to like you, Jonah, and your generation, like, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Like, y'all always have space in this this digital hemisphere that like we've created or whatever to air this stuff, because it's really frustrating to me to see that kind of thing continue to happen, and to see the needle not move on it. And like I do just want to like emphasize to teenagers, whether you're able to vote or not, like your voice does matter. Your vote absolutely does matter. It matters just as much as every single like bonehead, Trumpy boomer that you've talked to. And like you have the power to cancel that person out. Like straight up, like you're just the same as they are on that level, and you don't have to like read all of Marx's Capital or all of People's History of United States or all of Schweikart or all of whatever thing you want to point to be able to vote. Like if you have experienced any kind of like adversity through your educational experience, like if you've ever had to deal with a mental health issue, if you've ever had a problem getting a ride, like any of those things, that's all actually experience that relates to whether or not your opinion matters when you vote. Like if you had a problem with, like again, to take the getting a ride example, like if you had a problem with that, like that means that you have some modicum of understanding of what the value of public transportation would be, like. And that's the part about critical thinking, where it's like that I would say if you're, like, I'm trying to think how I sort of like got started on critical thinking. And I guess it was, I mean, for me, it didn't happen until college, and it happened in an art context, I mean, but in a lot of ways it was like just telling myself to ask more questions all the time. I don't know how, for somebody who's clearly like in it right now and engages in a decent amount of critical thinking, I mean, how did you land on it? Like being stuck in that space right now, how did you get to that?
Well, I have lived a life of pure struggle pretty much up until this point. So I mean, like my life has really been determined by like we were homeless for a long time. We moved around a lot, um, you know, different schools, different all this thing, a lot of instability. And as a result of that, I have always been sort of engaged on like why am I struggling? There's no reason for me to be struggling when I can go to my friend's house and he lives in a $500,000 suburb or whatever, and I have to move around from state to state because we can't afford anything. There's no reason for that. So I mean, from a very young age, I was looking at these like these problems, just my direct experience and my direct problems, not even thinking in terms of like policy, of course, but thinking in terms of like my experience and why these things are happening. And then you get to like, well, it shouldn't be happening like that. And then you get into like in those thoughts, like moral thoughts. So at a very young age, I was thinking about like what my morals are, what my principles are. I didn't think of it with those terms, but that's what it was. I mean, I was thinking about like what I think society should be from a very young age. And as a result of that, I never really was engaged in school. I never really was engaged in like the drone on keep pushing forward kind of aspect of anything that we've created in our society. And I have just kept thinking critically about all my experiences in school, at work, home life, friends, all of them, because I don't know, I can't pinpoint an exact moment. I feel like I've always had critical thinking just because I've had to live a very like individual life, had to fight for myself in a lot of ways for a long time. And I think critical thinking just sort of grew out of that. And it was very sad to like go into the public education system sort of late and then be like, oh, that kind of thinking isn't promoted in this. And like my way of learning or my way of thinking is looked down upon in school. And that, so I guess I would say I almost lost it in a sense because of the public education system. I didn't gain it because of it or anything like that. I almost lost it because, I get thrown into the system, and then it's like your way of thinking is not valid, and at a very young age, and it's like, well, shit, you have to either uncouple yourself from that and sort of just glide through school as it happens to you, or go into like work hard in school and decouple yourself from that critical thought. But back to I couldn't think of a specific moment, but
that's like, but see, like, and that's, man, like, that's interesting because you literally like you, in many ways, you just described exactly the experience that I wasn't able to imagine. You know what I mean? Like, which is awesome. Like, that's why we do this. That, but I think it's really, really, really strongly speaks to the whole aspect of like, this system is broken, right? Like, the way that we do teaching is broken because you were able to see what the issue was outside of the framework of public school. And then the moment that you're getting yourself into that space, what happens? It starts to, you're starting to question it, right? And so that to me is like I wasn't exposed to that type of critical thinking until I got to art school. And nowadays, a lot of the times when I try to engage in critical thinking, it happens to be like I get like, I'll get attacked. You know what I mean? Like, for this or that reason, for, oh, you're being an asshole, you're not thinking about this enough, like, yada yada. And I realize that, like, there's a certain, and I'm not saying that I'm better, right? Like, forever I'll always be holding myself to this crazy high standard and assuming that most of the time I'm wrong. But like, look, you gotta be able to think outside the box every once in a while. And we can't be attacking folks for thinking outside of that box. And we can't be telling youth that the way that, like, by asking a certain question that they're wrong, or questioning a certain convention of how discourse occurs, right? The what something means, what reading in between the lines is, right? Like, there's all this other stuff that goes along with understanding something like government and economics as a class within a school. And if you don't teach that, like, hey, ideology plays a huge role in this process, right? A personal ideology, what we believe, plays a huge role in this. It's the challenge that you face when you're trying to parse out education in that space. It's the challenge that you face by having public school in the first place, kind of. Like, and that's like, to me, that's actually a really interesting point for like of debate that I think, like, as leftists, it's worth wading into from time to time. It's like, okay, on the one hand, we believe strongly in the value of public schools, right? Like, it's utterly important because it creates a standard, right? This was something that I was talking with Robin Vogt the other day about. And like, absolutely, 100%. We also know that model doesn't work for every student, right? If you're an autistic person, there's a good chance that, like, your experience of a classroom is going to be hellish and you won't be able to learn a damn thing because there's too much noise, or there's too, you can hear the ventilation going, people's pens scratching on paper drives you nuts. Like, maybe the teacher's voice doesn't work for you. Like, maybe you're not able to take the time to fully understand something, whatever, right? Like, that's just one experience that I'm describing, but that's not great. So we know that public school doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And then another thing that we understand about public schools is that they are subject to the partisanship of state education boards appointees, right? So when you, or the school, like the school board in your area, right? Decisions that get made have to do with the partisanship of the members of the school board and that DOE board and the Secretary of Education, all of this stuff, right? It's reliant on, you can say it's a systemic thing, right? And you can say it relies on a purely like factual thing. But at the end of the day, ideology is what drives it. The reason ideology is what drives that is because it's ideology that gets the people who are elected, who then do the appointing or make the decisions, to where they are. So those people are, in a sense, the folks that get to decide, here's how the curriculum runs, right? Here's what we teach. Here's what we don't teach. Here's the way in which we teach what we teach. And that is, generally speaking, an abuse of power, right? So on the one hand, we have this belief where we want public institutions that are offered to us by the government so that we don't have to stress, oh, geez, how am I going to educate my family when I have no way to teach and I know that I don't have, like, I can't teach pre-calculus to my children. Like, I couldn't do that. But I could see why they might need it out in the world. There's a lot of professions that use calculus. That's how that is. So I would have to rely on a public school system in order to do that. But I can't control necessarily the way in which that calculus is taught. So I don't necessarily know if it's being taught in a way that's going to be the most useful for my child. This is the gray area. We don't necessarily, and how do, and I think that COVID itself is like the coronavirus pandemic is showing us the cracks in this education system even more than we already were aware of, right? Like,
Yes.
So it's just like, to me, that's an interesting balance of like, okay, how do we deal with the fact that we absolutely support public schools? We absolutely support the idea of credentialing teachers, but at the same time, it's not working for everybody. And it's also a major contributor to the fact that our populace doesn't feel like, that our populace in general doesn't feel like they understand the issues. And then the younger you are, the less allowed you feel to participate in that discourse because you don't know enough. You know what I mean? And
Right.
the real measure of whether or not somebody is able to vote or goes out and actually does vote is based off of how blindly confident they are in their beliefs. Right. And maybe that's a reason why it's so easy to motivate like an evangelical Republican, because it comes out of like a
Faith.
blind
It's like
application of
it's a
morality.
right. Yeah, it's like their blind faith in, they already exert like an evangelical Republican generally, not obviously speaking for everyone, but like generally already has that sense of blind faith that they're willing to exert in some sense by being an evangelical
Mm-hmm.
Republican. Not to like obviously it's not a problem to be a person of faith or anything like that, but you are already showing that you have that, and then it's easy to motivate you because it's easy to manipulate you in a sense. Those people
Right.
and those Republicans are easily like, they can give you keywords and stuff like that, and then you're like, oh, this person, yeah, and then you apply that blind faith to that person because they trigger those keywords in you,
Right.
and then yeah.
No,
It's very interesting dynamic.
I think that's right. I think that, and that's, I think, I think generally I would say, for younger voters to like, I know it's easy to get caught up in like Twitter fights and online discourse, like it's really easy to get like dragged into that as like an adult. Like I say that like loosely because I still don't feel like an adult. Like as an adult, I have a hard time with that. It's okay.
Yeah, my advice on that for sure, because that's a big problem, is like the social media aspect of politics, and that's actually another example of how engaged Gen Z is and stuff, like just how active they are on social media and how active all these Twitter fights are between Gen Z and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a good thing in a sense, but it's the wrong place to put your energy if you are
Right.
politically engaged. And like the piece of advice that I would give anyone who's like wants to get into politics and make a change just observe social media. If you actually want to like stay up to date and stuff, just to like, instead of engaging in these Twitter fights and stuff, just observe them. That's what I do. I just like kind of scroll past them. I
Yeah.
don't like, engage or anything like that. If you really need to, and then put your energy towards on the ground, real life mobilizing, because
Right.
trying to change someone's mind on Twitter isn't going to do anything to help what you support. Anything.
Right.
Because one person for a system, you're fighting this system, but at the same time you're trying to change the mind of one person on Twitter. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think, and then another thing too is I think, when your point about like just read it, like yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like I'm not saying don't engage like to ignore the discourse there altogether, but I mean just be measured about the way you engage with it, I guess. And
Right.
like and when you do consume it, right? Like it's the idea of like I think the underlying thing that we're discussing here is the need for critical thinking. And ultimately, you don't necessarily have to have like this wild history or like education set to engage in critical thinking. Like critical thinking is literally just asking like, hey, why or how true is that thing that was just said? Right? Like what
Yeah.
does
Instead of
that
just like
word
seeing
mean?
it and then being like, oh, that's right. Yeah, I just saw it on the Instagram. I know that person. I know he says thing that's right. So I'm gonna agree with that blindly. It's like, no, let me look at each post individually, even if it's from a
Yeah.
politician I support. It's like almost like assume everything you're seeing is propaganda, and then
Yeah.
be like, and then from there be like, okay, is this true? Let me research this. Go on, and then that is critical thinking. It's not like I need to know everything about
Right.
it. Like you said, it's not. You don't need to know everything about history. You don't need to know the entire historical context or the intricacies of policy. Just question what you're seeing, and
Yeah.
question what's being told to you.
Right. And like, I think about you said something about buzzwords. And I think buzzwords are huge, right? Like um it's this like I mean it comes down to like campaign messaging can be kind of like this too. Um where it's really easy to get like stuck in like um name calling, I guess, or like to use like very like stay away from certain terms if you can. You know what I mean? Like I think I mean maybe this is like fresh in my head because I literally just got called this today, but like words like grifter, I would I would caution folks to just like be really careful with that. Like be really like be really careful with like the language like of the movement that you're engaging with, right? Like it's really easy to adopt the language and the syntax and the talking points of something that you really strongly identify with.
And assuming what someone's intent is
Mm-hmm.
too. That's another big problem. It's like you don't assume that you know what someone's intent is based on one statement or something like that.
Right.
Like that is, oof, that's dangerous.
It's rough. No, well, I mean, I always like
Yeah.
the notion like we don't assume anything because assuming makes an ass out of you and me. Um, it's like so
I've never heard that one before. That's a good one.
yeah, and I think that's true. You know what I mean? Like I try really hard to not make assumptions about the way that folks explain things. And I try to remember that most of the time, myself included, like we get stuck in like we'll hear something and we'll repeat it. We may believe what we heard and we may like fully agree with what we heard, but we may not necessarily have thought through every single response that would follow that. So like when it comes to critical thinking, like, and I seriously, like, you don't, like, however old you are, you do not need, like, there is no age at which you can't do this. Um, you know, I would say even like, 5, 6 year olds can do this. As soon as you can understand language, you engage in critical thinking. I mean, like literally a child repeatedly asking their parent why, is in a sense a form of critical thinking because, and I actually really like, I really do kind of love that, like that moment, right? Like, you know, you always see, "Well, why? Because this. Well, why? Because this." And it's like, that always gets slapped. It's like, this is a really annoying thing that kids do.
Very, yeah, yes, exactly. It's like an
Super
annoying
annoying.
thing. Don't want that to happen. I don't want my
Right.
kid to ask me why.
You're
That
being
is
very
like the core of
contrarian.
the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That is the core of the problem right there, sir. You
And,
have just hit it on the nail, because that's it.
but the thing is, like, if like that has value though, because like how many of those parents in that moment literally have to answer those why questions themselves, right? Like, and I think about, like, if I had a kid and they did that to me, I would kind of appreciate it from time to time, because it forces me to always do that. So in my own head, like when I'm, you know, when I'm talking to somebody, I'll try and repeatedly ask myself, like, why am I responding this way? Why is this my reaction? You know, why am I saying this point? Like, why is this point right? You know, why did the person who made this point originally, like, why are they right? Why am I prioritizing them as the top opinion over somebody else? Like, that's that process that it goes through. And again, it's not something that you need to, like, it would be fucking awesome if we could have our teachers include this in the way that they teach. And there are certain educators that do. The way they just set up their classes, they'll do this. You know what I mean? Those teachers might also be at highest risk for backlash from parents, right? Like, if because, like, in all seriousness, I want folks to imagine this concept of, like, you have a teacher who's teaching a government and ethics class, right? You're teaching like a civics and ethics class in high school, and you're trying to have a meaningful discussion about I don't know, pick a historical socialist. You're trying to have like
Eugene Debs, like anyone. Yeah,
sure, yeah. Debs is a good example, right? You're trying to have a meaningful conversation about, like, who was Gene Debs, like, you know, it's like, and then all of a sudden you've got a student going home saying, like, you know, oh, well, we learned about Eugene Debs in school today. You got a conservative parent. What the hell is that? I don't want my kid hearing about this. Blah, blah, blah. So, like, I'm flying in, fucking PTO getting all, like, up in arms. What are we teaching our children? We have a commie in the house. Like, and so, look, like, teachers will heavily restrict what they say in class, even if they genuinely are like you could have a teacher that's totally competent in educating students on critical thinking and still not do that because of a fear of backlash from the system, right? Which gets us back into the need for reforming education, for really having a deeper look at, like, what do we teach our students, right? What do we teach in schools? What's the way that we go about teaching? And how does this affect civic engagement after public school, like outside of public school? What does that mean? I think it goes back to that thing that we had talked about in a previous show about, like, the need for teaching sociology and psychology in school. Like, I think those are really good, meaningful, substantial things that you could add to a public school curriculum to emphasize it. You know, I think, like, in government classes, spending more time talking about current issues, trying to, in history classes, spending time relating historical instances to contemporary instances so that we can see the thread a little bit more, you know, like,
and I would say teach history in a more objective sense too.
yeah,
You know, like, instead of just, and it's not even from, like, an American perspective, it's from, like, a specific ideological perspective from a certain sect of people in the United States
mm-hmm.
that have written history that keeps out the labor history, the history of, like, labor politicians like Wallace or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
then it leaves out the actual history on, you know, issues like World War II. And then just as a clear example, like, people don't even understand the Soviet impact in World War II simply because of, you know, they don't want to teach that the Soviets beat more Germans in World War II. It doesn't vindicate the
Right. Yeah.
Soviets in any way,
Nobody
but they
wants to
do not
talk
want to
about
teach
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah. The
Just
in
because
many ways.
Stalin bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not
Exactly.
that he isn't bad. Of course he is bad. He's a tyrant. But they did help us win World War II, and without them, you have to like full stop. You have to admit these historical facts and just present them so people like. If we just presented the history in a true way, I think a lot of these issues would be solved too. Because just like if people were learning about the the true history of the United States, how every war after World War II is really an economic war that started to extract resources from other countries that aren't the United States. Like if people were learning stuff like this, we would have a much like a lot more would change, and people would be a lot more engaged and be like, what, we imperialize other countries? Like you learn what imperialism is, and then you don't learn that we're still doing it.
Right.
You learn what colonial, like you learn what all these things are, like slavery and stuff like this. You don't learn that the prison industrial complex is still using slave labor in a sense.
It's we don't
labor. Like you said, you don't connect any of these terrible things that you hear about in history to what's actually happening now. And then no one thinks that we're running concentration camps on the border or all of these other things, because they have a historical context and people do know that the horrors of this, but it doesn't get presented that we're still doing it. And if we talked about that, I think a lot would change too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the thing to, it's like ultimately what you're saying here, and I think this is cool, right? That in a lot of ways, you don't even have to necessarily consciously emphasize critical thinking in your public education process, right? If from the outset you think about education as an act of critiquing knowledge up until that point, right? Like if you're like, okay, we are going to teach history with a critical eye towards that history, you will effectively teach critical thinking in the process. Like you have to. Like you cannot be critical of a history without thinking critically about it. That's just the baseline. So
but they think that they are. And that's the other weird thing. They absolutely think that they are teaching that, because you hear this all the time, like, well, history isn't like, if someone's like, I don't want to learn this is boring. Well, history is important because then we don't repeat history. Okay, then critique the history that's happened, because right now all I'm seeing is the United States is a great country that's done a couple of bad things, but that's not the true history. You're not doing what you're saying you're doing right now. And they do that on a whole number of levels. Like you could point out examples in every whatever class that they say that they're doing this, that they say that they're teaching critical thinking. They are all about this. And if you question that, they're like, no, learning the Pythagorean theorem in this method is teaching you critical thinking because you're fixing these complex problems this way. I feel like that's a bit of a cop-out to them not actually having an answer on like them teaching critical thinking through actual skills. And that's a big problem.
Yeah. And I mean, like
all these
I will say that, like, when it comes to the Pythagorean theorem, right? Like I've
not
used
that's not important.
Right. Yeah. Like I've used the Pythagorean theorem outside of, just
of course.
But the point is more so like, give me some real world applications for it. Like tell me where, like give me a list of professions that would potentially require me to have this knowledge like on the tip of my tongue. You know what I mean? Like,
or just real world skills. I think the Germans, I don't know a whole lot about the German education system, but I think the Germans do a fairly good job at this, in that don't they do vocational training fairly early on for their students? Like they have them kind of look at career fields and then move on and learn like skills based on the career field that they've looked at. I'm not that I don't know much about that, but I feel like that would be pretty helpful, and so you wouldn't have kids learning things that they might not use in their chosen career field.
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. And I think like, I mean, I don't necessarily know. I'd have to do a little bit more research on like the German public education system, but I think broadly speaking, yes, that works. That's very effective. I mean, there's Northeastern College, like, or Northeastern University, I should say, like they operate on that model where oftentimes you'll spend like a semester in class and then you'll spend a semester out in the field, literally like doing an internship, working in whatever, you know, field your major is in. So you're always kind of bouncing back and forth between trade application and a more academic environment, right? And I like that is pretty much always the best way to teach, right? Like in my experience, I learned, you know, so much of my own personal education, like with video and whatever, right? Like that all occurred by me teaching myself. And what really happened was like, I would be, you know, they'd show me gear, you know, I'd be like, here's the gear. Here's how this gear works. Go use it, you know, and then it was on me to figure out how I was going to use it, how I wanted to use it. If it was something that I wanted to do, usually I'd have to try and look it up or figure it out. And it was way more about like, okay, we're going to talk about the work once you brought it in and it's done. So my education.
And those are the classes.
Go ahead. No, you can go ahead. You go ahead. Yeah.
But those are the classes in that makes me immediately think of the CTE program that they have in Comval. Those are the classes that are, I think, not only the most popular classes, but also the most helpful classes in my experience. I've taken a lot of those CTE classes. Mm-hmm. They do exactly that. They give you the equipment and what you need for whatever class it is, maybe graphic design, photo, video, whatever. And then they say, go use this equipment and create and, you know, do things with it, experiment. And then from that, people actually appreciate the education more. And then I've seen kids just anecdotally, like kids who in any other class would not have paid attention or listened to the teacher, relate to that teacher and are engaged in the class in a way that I've never seen them engaged. I'm, you know, having been in classes and with them for a long time, I've never seen them engaged before, simply because they are given free rein to create and do what they see fit with the equipment while still gaining the skills necessary to have this certificate that will give them a better chance of getting into a trade college. So that program that Comval set up is a great template or beginning of a template for what schools should do moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing too is that what it does is like, right, like let's say that this class that you're taking is what's going to ultimately lead you towards your career. What you're doing in that environment is you're creating a positive rather than a positive and productive relationship to the labor rather than a punitive one, if that makes any sense. Like so many jobs, I feel like, you know, like for young people, it's like you got to go out and you got to get a job, like, you know, like all right, kiddo, time to get off the couch. I've given you an allowance for long enough. Now you gotta go get work. You gotta work a, you know, part-time job. You gotta earn your keep, yada yada, right? That's like a very punitive way to introduce somebody to the labor force, right? Because it creates this concept in the mind of the person doing the work that like, oh, well, this isn't what I really want to be doing, that I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do this job to make money so that I can go do what I want to do afterwards. Rather than saying, what if the work that you're doing, the thing that's paying you, is getting you to where you want to be? Like, what if that, like, the labor is the reward, right? And that helps us as a society get more aligned to like having a positive relationship and empowerment of the workforce, because all of a sudden we have people that genuinely want to work, like not because they want to make money so that they can keep their house or that they can pay their, you know, like pay their grocery bill, which is like us capitalizing on their need to survive, which is kind of fucked up. Like, you know, like it's all this very punitive, like tinged thing, and it's not like there's no empowerment of the individual in that space, and that's something that we put kids through, like early on. Like that's rough, dude. Like,
Yeah.
and for us to then be like, well, I don't know why we can't get the youth to turn out. I mean, we had Cardi B get up here and dance and, you know, like do a whole performance live for free on Facebook. Like, why? I don't know why we didn't get the vote out more. And it's like, well, because nothing about the system that got youth here today changed. We didn't, in the 4 years between 2016 and 2020, did anything about the education system change for the better that made it possible for youth to feel more empowered about going out and believing in their own mindset? Were we able to elevate enough people within Gen Z to go out and like show other people in Gen Z like, oh yeah, my generation is being well represented right now in the public sphere, you know, in the celebrity sphere? Do I feel like I'm being adequately represented? Are there enough, you know, trans voices? Are there enough voices of that are not white? Are there, you know, like enough voices that are my age? Like how has that changed? And frankly, like I just don't like, you know, there are certainly people that have risen up. I know that Ilhan Omar's daughter, Isra Hirsi, is like, she's great. You know, like I like a lot, like her commentary all the time. I think she makes really good points. But one is not enough. You know what I mean? Like a handful is not enough. And you know, to say like, you know, we're going to reach out to colleges, we're going to interview college students, we're going to, you know, promote high schoolers who are getting involved. We're going to, you know, like, I think one could say that there was a decent amount of attention after Parkland. I think the Parkland kids
I was just going to actually
did a lot to raise the profile of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking of that because, like, I don't know. It seems like they use us. It definitely seems because when something like Parkland happens, you see that those kids who do and are doing great work get a lot of media attention. They get a lot of celebrity from this, but look at the questions being asked to them. None of these questions are like. I don't know. It seems like
you're making a really good point. Yeah, like what are
dropped off, and then like forgotten about, and then they wonder, oh, why is the youth coming out? The liberal class is like, I love David Hogg. He's a great person. Look at all the work he's doing, and then nothing changes on it because they're not actually fighting for gun reform in the Congress and stuff like that. And then they wonder why all these youth people, like why polls are showing that youth aren't going to come out for Joe Biden or whatever, and it's pretty terrible that they're using young people in this way, and they shove them out when politically advantageous for them. I think the same could be said for a bunch of different demographics, but young people, you know, specifically are the ones that we're talking about right now. But, you know, they get shoved out by the liberal class and then, you know, exploited for whatever optics that they need, then dropped off, and nothing changes for them. And then we wonder why there's social unrest.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's like, you know, and I think that's like that, like right there, what you just outlined is the critique of identity politics in a lot of ways, right? Like it's saying like, y'all just took David Hogg and you stuck him out front. He made some really solid arguments for why there should be serious gun reform within the country. And everybody instead focused on like, how much of a wave this young guy was making, you know what I mean? Or like focusing on something that Emma, I think her name was Emma. Why am I drawing a blank here?
Emma Gonzalez.
Emma Gonzalez. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That, you know, like Emma Gonzalez got a lot of flack for things that she would say because it was like so far left. And then there was the thing of like, well, these kids don't really know what they're saying yet. They, you know, like they're just fresh on the scene, you know, like, but we really like their motivation. You know, we really like their energy and their passion. That's what matters.
Yeah, keep that enthusiasm, but keep that enthusiasm. Vote, but you know, just pipe it down a bit. Pipe
and
it
it's
down.
like y'all elevated. Yeah, like y'all elevated every single thing except their issue.
Yeah.
Like every single thing except their issue. And then what happens? There's like the New York DA issues the thing about like the lawsuit against Wayne LaPierre, and just like millions of dollars siphoned off from the NRA, and now they're facing being dissolved. Like, in at least in the state of New York, like, these kids made a great policy point. They made a fucking awesome policy point, and no one gave that the weight that it needed to have. Like, it was so heavily focused on their identity as young people that they went through this horrible experience. Like, and I'm not saying don't like acknowledge that. Yeah, that's what got them to where they're at today. But by continuously talking about that and perpetuating the discussion of what happened to the kids in Parkland, right? You're trapping them in that time. You're trapping them in that trauma. And you're not letting them be able to grow and expand beyond that and be intelligent humans that experienced the exact problem with the system. And you're not allowing them to come out and have a reasonable critique of that problem without politicizing the you know, leftist or Marxist underpinnings of some of the ideology that they are basing their positions off of, right? Like, why?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And it's interesting to see, like, the same people that would say, like, enough with thoughts and prayers, we need action, are the same people that are doing that too. Like, like they're calling for action at the same time while they're shutting down the people who could affect real action. And
right.
It makes me question their motives. I mean, like at a certain point, it makes me, you have to question their motives, because after so long of doing this, they are not fighting for you. Like, they do not care. They just do not care. And like, we have to, as a populace or whatever, as a working class like population, just recognize that these people do not care, and like, we can't wait for them to make the action that we obviously know needs to be made, I guess.
Yeah,
like,
and it's like, we got to take it back from them. Like, this is just like I just categorically would say, like, you know, to anybody my age who's just like, man, I don't have time. I'm like, okay, well, like, hit me up. Let's figure out a way to get you an absentee ballot. You know what I mean? Like, I'll help you do that. I will find a way to do that. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, I will individually help my friends to vote if I'm able to. I haven't had the opportunity to do it thus far, but I would be happy to do so otherwise. You know, like, if it means, you know, like, setting up on the day of voting, like, you know, us just like getting to be like, all right, man, let's just like pool as many email addresses as we can and just be like, all right, social distance meetup at like Putnam Park ahead of time. You know, we're all gonna go vote. Like, you know, like we're gonna do it in a block. Like, to just organize those kind of things, like on a peer-to-peer basis, individual to individual. That's like, that makes a difference.
That's how we change it right there.
Right.
That's it.
That's
like,
it.
You just gather your group together, like, vote as a block, and affect change. Because that's like the only thing we can do at this moment is that right there, for sure.
Right. And I think, like, the, you know, the framing for it, the messaging that I would say is, it's like, look, like, the why of it is because we're getting screwed. Like we, like, and when I say we in this moment, I'm talking specifically to millennials and Gen Z. Okay. I get we have our differences. You know, there was like some, like, there was some comment.
I did see that,
that I saw of like a bunch of Gen Z kids making fun of millennials, half of which I like at least half of which I just categorically agreed with because it was true and it was funny. You know, like, dude, my generation has a lot of problems. We're pretty messed up, but like, you know,
all generations do. But
right.
It is. I mean, like, we do have to come together in some sense because we are on our last leg in a lot of ways. Yeah. And a lot of us are there. Like, we can't wait 10 more years or 15 more years. It's like this is the moment, because we are like on the precipice of what could be a very, very devastating time for us as these two youngest generations. And it's about us just taking the time, standing up, coming together, and changing it, because there's nothing else There's no
Yeah.
other option for us. We
Well,
can't be disaffected. It's not
and it's just a
viable.
matter of like teaming up, you know what I mean? And then like,
Right.
so, and just like get it down into like a like straight up like on for us here in New Hampshire, right? Like we're dealing with like this crazy back and forth with the Secretary of State about what, but like who's eligible to vote. You know, like right now, let's see if I can get this nonsense up. So let's see. Yeah. So this right here is this is our current this is SB3, which is what this is the law that has been so hotly contested, and it has to like a lot of it has to do with defining like domicile, like where people live. Let's see if I can get this to fit a little better on the screen here. Yeah, so
Right, because the big issue was with like college students and like them not being able to vote because of like where they live and their address and stuff, right?
Right. It's about like it's a matter of what's your residence and you being able to prove that place of residence. So
right.
That's the one that like is pretty nebulous and confusing, and there was an injunction that was filed that I think sort of finds this unconstitutional, which is now being, I believe it's going through an appeals process currently. But generally speaking, right now, it did default to the original language. I don't want to mischaracterize that, but see if there's anything that I can sort of pull up. See, this is awesome. Hold on. This is great. I want to take a moment. Okay. SOS, voter registration, NH. That's the Google search term, right? Top link. Why? Why? Okay. I do know that they just updated their website, so let's, here's their second link. Okay, this is a little bit better, right? Like, but guys, come on. First, when your first result is a 404, I know that they just fixed the website and it's all nice and shiny and new, but like, dude, SEO guys, SEO. So it's and even then, this is pretty, like, this is a little bit unwieldy.
Yeah, bare bones.
Let's see here. So let's see what they've got to say here. Because the law is not going to necessarily be great. So let's try and make this a little bit bigger for ourselves here. Okay. If you are domiciled in the New Hampshire town or city ward where you want to vote, you will be 18 years of age or older on the day of the next election and are a United States citizen. You are eligible to register to vote. There is no minimum period of time you are required to have lived in the state before being allowed to register. You may register as soon as you move into your new community. Now, something to point out, like I will say this. Generally speaking, New Hampshire has pretty good voter registration laws. We do allow same-day voter registration, which is great, right? Like, there's all of this, there's all this stuff that we allow for, and then, essentially, they say here, proof of having established a domicile in the town or city where you will vote. Here's the acceptable forms. This is it. So this is this was for 2018. Documents listed in those statutes were recognized by election officials prior to the adoption of Senate Bill 3. So that big chunk of text, that big bill that I showed, this is sort of the things that we accepted prior to that whole thing threw it into a state of confusion. But again, it's been I believe there was an injunction filed that makes it unconstitutional for the time being. So basically what they're saying is driver's license with your current domicile on it, document from your school proving that you live on campus in some sort of housing. Colleges will provide you with that proof. Note signed by a school official, including resident advisor or resident assistant. So just like your RA can get you a credential that will make it possible for you to vote. Rental agreement, obviously, like if you have a copy of your lease, that's enough. Document showing that you own the place you were domiciled at, such as a deed, property tax bill, or other similar document that has your name and address. Motor vehicle registration, non-voter ID showing your current address. Obviously voter photo ID issued by the DMV, document proving you have a child enrolled in a school nearby. That would do it. State or federal tax form, any of that kind of information. Any form from the U.S. Post Office showing your name and the physical address where you were domiciled, which is not a P.O. box. So if you just update your mailing address with the USPS, they should give you a confirmation. That would be enough. Public utility bill, such as an electric, telephone, water, gas, or other utility bill, note from a homeless shelter, and any other document that shows manifestation of your intent to make the place you claim your voting domicile. So basically, like, there are any number of different documents that you can use to prove that you live where you live. You can go and you can do this the day that you vote, right? Like, there's nothing like obviously the Republicans in the state with Senate Bill 3 absolutely were trying very hard to make this a lot more confusing. And you can tell because without even reading it, right? It shows you what they crossed out, right? It shows you what it was before, and then everything that's bold and in italics is new. So why we needed to go from a domicile is that one place where a person more than any other place has established a physical presence and manifests an intent to maintain a single continuous presence for domestic, social, and civil purposes relevant to participating in democratic self-government. Right? That seems adequate. That seems like a perfectly adequate description of what a domicile is, right? Like,
but we need this. We need this big.
No, we need a multi-part. We need a multi-part description of, this is insane,
Yeah.
It's just, it's so wordy and it's not necessary. It's really it's confusing to me. I think it's confusing to a lot of people. It was confusing to a lot of people. It was confusing to the people at NHPR. I mean, come on. These folks read this stuff for their job day in and day out to report on this stuff. They're in there filing requests all the time, and they're like, we don't really understand what you guys are trying to say here. And they've had to do so much reporting just to pull it out of them. And I know that they've fought with Bill Gardner so many times over trying to get a clear answer on just about anything. So it's look, voter disenfranchisement is a huge, huge component of this. And the actual, we do a great job in this state, and all of the moves lately against voter registration, all of that is specifically targeted at alienating college voters. This conversation literally pertains to the exact demographic that we're talking about. So, UNH kids, Keene State kids, Plymouth kids, Dartmouth kids, please fight this shit. Dude, do not go vote. You can. You absolutely can. It doesn't, like, I promise you, you do have a document somewhere that will be enough. A lot of people that do run the, like the volunteers that show up in these local towns to do this type of stuff, a lot of them really do genuinely just care about wanting to make sure that everybody gets to vote, like in a nonpartisan way. Yeah. It's like, it's really, there's, I know the folks that do it here in Peterborough. I know a lot of them, and they're really committed, nice folks, and they just want to help you out. So like, don't let the coldness and the vacuousness of discussion that happens on the internet jade your perspective on whether or not you should be going out and voting, or like whether you know enough to do so. You do. Like, you absolutely do. I would argue that middle schoolers know enough to vote, right? Like, genuinely, I would argue that they have enough of an understanding of the world that they can make a relatively informed decision about voting. That's a hot take. I'm sure people will disagree with that, but
I know you'll get some comments being like, well, when I was 16, I drove a car into a truck, so I definitely shouldn't be able to vote. That's great. Yeah.
And I would argue that one's ability to control a motor vehicle has nothing to do with their ability to understand when they're being screwed over or not. So that's like, just trying to get out in front of that one.
Yeah.
But, I think that, the moral of the story is like to understand that youth voter disenfranchisement is part of a really, really long project that conservative and neoliberal governments have been working on for a really long time. There's been a serious clip of interest from the religious organizations, the NRA, people that will come in and try to sort of like support actions to make it harder for people to register to vote, to find transportation. We'll switch voting locations last minute. That gets really confusing for young voters when you just like at the very last minute change a polling location. That's not good. So it's about like really being clear on the outset, but it's important to remember that project is like, it exists as a means to maintain a power structure that keeps us from fighting for social programs, right? Like, it's a function of maintaining money and power. And literally they keep winning because we kind of keep taking the bait. Like, we keep taking the debate, that bait of like, well, maybe I don't know enough. Like, maybe they're right. Maybe I haven't done enough research. Maybe my vote doesn't really matter that much. We're letting them run space in our heads. Into this. Yeah. Like,
it's gotten so bad that we're willingly participating in this. They're not even like forcing us to do it. We're doing it to ourselves, and we have to stop it.
Yep.
In order to win.
And one of those things is like where it's easiest to start critical thinking is applying it to yourself. Like, it's actually like it's both easiest and hardest, right? Because you, like, anytime we have to ask ourselves, okay, how can I do better? How can I be a better friend? How can I be a better partner? How can I be a better family member? Like, how can I be a better member of society, right? It always starts out with us like examining that kind of like, what, like how can I grow? How can I be more than I am now? But what's so important on the other side of that is to remember that, like, you can, you will, and you do all of those things already, right? Like, I would say just like every young person who's about to get the ability to vote, or who's like, just trying to make it through their 21st year without getting alcohol poisoning or whatever, right? Like, you do matter, and you do know enough, and you are a good person. Unless you're like beating people, you know what I mean? Like, generally speaking, folks are good folks. I just feel that way. I don't know. Maybe that's a that's too optimistic of me, but I genuinely believe in people. And I also believe
No,
that,
I totally agree for sure.
and I think,
I think
yeah, go ahead.
no, I think you're totally right. People are in like, most people are pretty inherently good, and it takes a lot of trauma to push someone to be like genuinely evil or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
like I don't know how exactly to get kids in this election cycle to realize that their voice matters, like in such a large way that like will boost voter turnout up. But at the end of the day, like we have to get the youth to realize that their voice does matter and that they
Yeah.
are as valued as a person in power. And just because a person is, you know, an elected official or a police officer or any of this doesn't mean that they are higher than you on like some kind of like societal spectrum. And no, you are a level. You are not a kid. You are a human being with who participates in this society and has just as valued as an opinion as anyone else who participates in the society does.
Right.
And that one change in your thought process will change your whole life, really. I mean, once you start seeing yourself as an equal and stop like putting yourself down just because of these fake power dynamics that have been created because like societal power dynamics, not really fake, but you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
if you keep putting yourself down, then you're not going to get anywhere. Once you stop doing that, you will get to a place where you are a better person outside of politics, like for yourself. And once you apply that to politics, we as a society will be much better on all
Right.
different levels.
Well, and something I would say is, you know, like, okay, for the conversation on the left, right? Like, I, you know, personally, right? Like, I've found that, like, I'll see young folks protesting something, and I'll be like, wow, they are further to the left than me. Okay. But at that moment, like, I have to ask myself, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, does that, like, is that, am I really advocating for what I should be advocating for right now? Or am I carrying on the same tradition that my elders passed down to me? Like, am I now reliving that same problem? Right. And so, like, I would say that there are plenty of times where, like, and you and I have had conversations like this where I was like, man, like, I feel like my views on compromise have had to shift a little bit because I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm now doing the thing that bothers me so much, right? Like, I will compromise on something before I've really like finished fighting for the thing that I needed to be fighting for the most. And like, honestly, the younger generation is what kept me in check on that. Like, you kept me in check on that, and I really appreciated that. And so that's the value of it, right? Is like that moment of like that like literal lack of time involved in the whole process gave me perspective on like, wait a minute, like, I'm getting too lost in the debate surrounding how to get this done, or I'm getting too lost in the details of systemic priority or whatever, and I'm forgetting about the idea that I'm here fighting for in the first place. And like, I think I might need to reassess like how I look at dealing with solutions, you know, like I need, like, if I'm going to try and incorporate this whole coalition of young people into like what I want to do, I need to shift the way I'm approaching my commentary and the way I'm presenting
and
my
like,
work.
oh yeah, no, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Yeah,
that was
and yeah, just to sort of like bring that around, like something we have to all realize is not only do our voices as young people matter, but we have something to learn from each other in different generations. Not just like I can learn from you because you have more experience, but you can learn from me because we have different perspectives. And it's not about more experience so you know more so you can teach me. It's about, let's learn from each other's experiences as human beings. Or
it's okay.
like,
We're
like
good.
age or something like that. I froze for a second there, but
it's okay.
like
We're good.
age or sex or gender, anything like that, like move past these arbitrary dividers that we have. Let's look at each other from person to person and learn from each other's experiences, taking from that and moving forward from there. Because
Yeah.
you know,
I think you're right.
You can
And
all
I
learn
mean,
from each other.
we can. And I think, it's like, look, so I thought, like, and I think we're coming around to the end of it. So I think it's like, I want to talk about, like, why this episode is named what it is, right? Like, why, and I feel bad because I didn't necessarily consult you before I named this episode, but the reason I did name it Chasing Unicorns, right, is because how would you actually catch a unicorn, right? Like, let's just, like, you can't catch something that you don't believe in. And if folks really want to lock down the youth vote, you have to believe in it, and you have to believe in youth in order to get the youth vote. And the only way you can believe in the youth vote is to listen to what youth have to say, period. Like, there's no big ad campaign or celebrity super team or, like, social media strategy that's going to make any of that work. Like, none of that is going to happen, period, unless you just believe in the youth vote and believe in the youth, period, and believe in their ability to make cogent, measured political critiques on their own, like, without any sort of, like, extra inference from or support or custodianship of them by a different, like, more learned group. It's just, it doesn't, like, you got to believe in it. So I don't know if that's, like, if how you feel about that, but that was sort of like,
I think that's perfect. That is couldn't have said it better. That's great. Yeah.
So hell yeah, man. I think we slammed it.
Great.
I think we slammed it out of the park on this.
Yeah, I think we did. And there'll be much more.
So. Yeah. And it's definitely something that I'm always happy to keep talking about. You know what I mean? But I think it's like in all seriousness, I mean, like, when I hear you talk about your personal experiences and what you went through with it, like, this is the stuff that I come away with when I think about my experiences and what I went through, like, and what I needed to hear at any given moment, like, I remember having, like, there was, like, a young liberals group for, like, a year or two when I was, I think it might have only been 1 year, but, like, really what it was just that, like, maybe 5 or 6 of us that would sit around at school, like, on a Thursday for a few hours and just talk shit about politics. But
I think that's great. I love that.
it was great. It was really great.
Yeah. You get to, like, have that sense of, like, you're like, oh, I'm engaged in this, and you, like, the back and forth between you and your friends is always good. You get to, like, hear their ideas, and it's level too. You feel like it's your first jump into, like, the world of political conversations with adults, because you're like at the same level as these people, and you're all, like, talking about it. You're like, oh, what do you support about this? It's a great way to start, for sure.
Right. So, and, like, and if that's definitely something that, like, if you are, if you're a teen and you're trying to figure out, like, ways to elicit your friends to just, like, get out the vote, like, that would be it. Is just like, like, and I'm sure you do this, but, like, just have those conversations with your friends. Like, don't be afraid to wade into it. Like, don't sweat having to sound smart or well read. Like, it's okay. Like, and the thing about it is, like, when you run into some information that you don't know or you feel uncertain, just go check it out. Just read it. Like, it's like, y'all got the
internet.
We
all have supercomputers at our disposal. That's one of the things that, like, a lot of us forget. Like, we have supercomputers at our disposal with almost anything that you could ever want to research right there. So you don't know anything and you want to know something, look it up.
Yeah. It. Exactly. And I mean, like, that was something that, like, I didn't have as much when I was in high school. Like, we weren't, we didn't have the smartphone was, like, just barely a thing, if it was a thing at all. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to remember when the first iPhone came out, but it's like, I want to say
7 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So that was literally the year I graduated. Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So, Yeah. So for me and my friends, like our pure experience with the internet was one that was like through desktop computers. You know what I mean? Like, and through PS2, straight up. Like I like that was our relationship to the internet. So the advantage that like younger people have now in that sense with like obviously, and I think maybe this might be the next topic is like technology and social media. That's probably a good place to go for next time.
Yeah.
But it's like that accessibility makes it so much easier for y'all to have your fingers on that information. You know what I mean? Like y'all
And
have
participate in those conversations. Yeah.
right.
If
Like
want to
y'all
have young
got
people
that.
in there, all the tools are ready for us to be a part of those conversations to make change.
Yeah, man. Like
So
like
it's all
seriously,
there.
if I had a searchable encyclopedia in my pocket for my senior year of high school, like I would have done like I would have been able to engage in a lot more intelligent conversation. Like I'll just put it
Yeah.
that way. You know, like yeah, maybe if I had been involved in Facebook more, it would have been to the detriment of my high school experience, and it could have dumbed me down a little bit more. Yeah, totally. I can see that happening 100. But it also, it's a double-edged sword. So we'll,
Right.
obviously we'll talk about it maybe next time or whatever. But the moral of the story is like, young folks, y'all got the tools to do it, and y'all really do genuinely have the intelligence and the world experience to do it. Don't let any older voter tell you don't, and don't let the asshole government that will do everything they can to stand in their way between you voting and not voting. They just don't give them that power. Like don't let them convince you, because really, in a lot of ways, especially in this state, in New Hampshire, all they've got is making you feel stupid. Like that's it. That is their number one biggest weapon, is just making you feel too dumb to vote. So just don't let them do that. You know what I mean? Like if you're feeling that way, like dude, like if you're feeling that way, like shit, like tweet at like me or Jonah or locally sourced or whatever. Like we will talk to you. Like we will help you recognize that you have value. Right? Like I will always remind someone when, like, a younger person, if some douchebag comes along and says that they shouldn't vote or they don't know enough, I will happily back you on that. Please feel free to reach out. Like that's
Yeah.
what this kind of thing is for. So
Like you're not alone. Like we
right.
have support. There is support for you. And
Right.
it's like, it's cheesy, but be the change that you seek.
Exactly.
Like we're here to support you all. Be the change that you seek.
Exactly. We can mobilize, y'all. Solidarity. So with that, dude, this was a fun conversation, man. I'm glad we did this
This has
one
been
today.
great.
Yeah. So
I'm loving these deep dives.
dude,
Great
me too.
segments. Yeah.
Me too. It's good. It's just like, oh man, like I said, I had such
I'm loving
crazy...
researching for them too. Like having to like deep dive into specific things to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. It's fun to spend around like digging on stuff like this. So yeah, I've been enjoying it as well. So I'm glad, man. I'm glad we get to keep doing this. So
yeah, me too.
Hell yeah.
Looking forward to next time.
Yeah, Jonah. Me too. All right. Well, all right, folks. We'll catch y'all next week. All right. And take care. Okay. Bye.